Russia's imperial aspirations. In this video I will talk about my insights about Russia today, and its many aspirations. Hope you like it. Number 1. Empire effect. Many empires throughout history have had tendencies of expansion and conquest. Countries on the edge of the empire were often at risk of conquest and annexation. At the end of the 19th century, many countries were still under the mists of history, unaware that with the development of technology, the ancient worldview of conquering and looting other people's property and annexing one's own cannot be maintained as a factor of global cooperation in the long-term perspective of humanity. And then came the 20th century, in which the ancient logic of appropriation and conquest by means of war, by using newest war technologies, escalated to the peak of human pathology. First and Second World War. After these events, many nations, both larger and smaller, both militarily stronger and less powerful, realized that further and unreflective insistence on the ancient predatory worldview could lead to completely destructive results for everyone. Larger nations have led smaller ones into a promising direction. The UN, NATO, EU and similar organizations were founded which were supposed to unite the interests of men through trade, via cultural cooperation and international conventions, at the same time preventing nations with imperial and conquering tendencies on their way to expansion. Some nations learned from their mistakes, and eventually gave up on further conquests, annexations and expansion. Japan, obviously, but not all, of course. Russia, for example, unlike America at the beginning of the 20th century, developed economically very differently, and throughout the 20th century it was and remained imbued with earlier ideologies, primarily of its own, but also heavily inspired by thinkers like Karl Marx. Figures like Lenin and Stalin were leaders who led masses of people to their deaths, and Hitler, one could conclude, learned and drastically improved their tactics and overall effect. A vicious cycle, which cannot be broken, following the well-trodden paths of blinded imitation of historical predecessors. As such, Russia has not learned from its historical mistakes, apparently not enough not to repeat them, and that is why Russia today, still unreflective of its imperial tendencies to conquer and distribute territories of other nations, is unaware that the time of colonialism has long passed and should not resurface in near or far future. Number 2. Consolidation of domestic political power. In the absence of self-development of its own potential regarding new technologies, improvement of living standards, futuristic inventions and overall intellectual maturity and understanding, the passive, aggressive approach of a large unreflective nation like Russia is simple, accusation and war with others instead of its own development. And while Hitler's Germany accused alleged Jewish Bolshevism and used it as an alibi for attacking the Soviet Union, today Russia uses alleged Ukrainian neo-Nazism as an alibi for attacking Ukraine. The parallels are obvious, the century-old propaganda strategy is noticeable, and as always, the lack of political invention is so very disappointing. Number 3. Envy towards America. Today, Russia considers America the winner in global cultural influence, especially on European nations. Indeed, American cultural influence on the daily lives of Europeans throughout the 20th and 21st centuries has brought many liberal innovations and advantages over previous traditional conditioning. Noticeable shortcomings, too, but each nation today has the responsibility to distinguish what to accept and what to reject in terms of foreign cultural products and payable services. But Russia's problem is that it does not have a liberal, democratic and practically beneficial cultural matrix that would attract Europeans under its unique cultural, technological, economic and generally useful ideological features. Of course, it is completely incorrect on the Russian part to consider that European values and cultural traditions have been completely swallowed up under American influence and as such are worthless and trivial, which could not be further from the truth. And that's why, in the absence of cultural virtues that it can offer to everyone around it and thereby match America as its global influencer, Russia decided to match the influence of American culture on Europe and the world with its traditional, czarist non-democratic militarism. Doing so, Russia successfully proved itself as a politically retrograde, imperial would-be power, currently incapable of improving itself, but still able to hurt many others.